Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue, and finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. This month's topic is on the beautiful gift of adoption, and as always, we have a special guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
My name is Elaine. I am 36 years old. I live out in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I was born in June of 1985 and was adopted in August of 1985.
So today we're going to talk with someone who has been adopted. So Elaine, why don't you tell us what was it like to grow up as an adopted child?
I had a really awesome childhood. I don't categorize being adopted versus not in any separate categories because It was always just a very open topic of discussion in our household. And I was adopted by two amazing parents. They could not conceive naturally, and they waited a long time to have the opportunity to adopt a child. So at that point, my parents were on the older end. They were in their late 30s when I was a child. Even that didn't make a difference. I had a wonderful childhood, participated in all kinds of sports and music and all the opportunities in the world. It was a very happy experience.
So you always knew you were adopted, of course, right? That was not some surprise that came on you. You grew up being told.
Right. I mean, I was adopted as a little baby. So I was only 2 months old when I was adopted. And I look nothing like my parents. So I'm, light skin, light hair, tall, and my parents both have dark hair, dark eyes, and are short. So if you were to just look at us from afar, there might be some questions there that would linger. But at the same time, they're my parents. I can't remember a moment like, oh, we're going to sit you down and we're going to tell you that this is why you are a little bit different, or this is why you might get questions when you're in elementary school or middle school. However, there was also never that label of, this is our adopted daughter, Elaine. Right. There was never anything like that either. It was just a very open, transparent conversation because everybody in our house and family were very grateful for the whole experience.
So Elaine, did you grow up wondering about your birth mom? How much did you know about your story?
In the mid 80s, a lot of adoptions were closed adoptions.
Right.
So I had very limited information about my birth mother, her background, and same with my birth father. I found these little kind of nuggets of information that were provided by my birth mother throughout the adoption process that I really held on to when I was a little kid, knowing that my birth father was Greek, knowing that somewhere out there I have 5 older half brothers, even just understanding that, they were not married and he was significantly older and she was significantly younger. It helped me process what it meant. I have other friends who are also adopted that have no information at all. And that's hard. I think that's hard. But for me, I had these little nuggets of information, just enough to feel good that decision was the right decision for my birth mother at that time in her life. And it was just always available to me.
So you knew your birth father was Greek. You knew your birth father had other children that were older than you. And you knew a little about their ages. Sounds like a fairly limited amount of information. Did you think at some point when you were growing up that, maybe when I get older, I'm going to want to look up my birth parents, or that wasn't something you thought about?
You have moments where maybe you're in elementary school, maybe you're in high school, maybe it's much later in life. You always wonder. There is this little, spark in your brain that says, I'm curious whether people act on that or not. That's a whole different thing. But for me, I had a really beautiful childhood. I grew up as an only child. So that probably affected my want and desire to seek out my birth mother, because I was always curious if I had more siblings. I wasn't looking for another mother figure or father figure because I had the best parents ever. And my curiosity stemmed mostly from the sibling inquiry, rather than feeling directly connected to my birth mother. But because I'm now a mother and I have two little kids, I can see where if you're on the, actually male or female, if you're at that phase in life where you are now having your children of your own, or you're going through the adopted process, or you're building your family, whatever that looks like, I can see where that phase of life would be very motivating to seek out more information about where you came from biologically.
All right, Elaine. So why don't we talk about the story of how you reunited with your birth mom? How did that come about?
I think during my childhood, the laws about closed adoptions,
Right.
and how much information you could request and receive, it changed over time. I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that once the child turns 18, originally you were allowed to, request all the documentation about your birth parents that you wanted. And I would have, gone to the courts to request that information. But somewhere along the lines, I think it changed to 21 or 22 for the child. And on top of that, not only I couldn't just go ask for information, you had to independently request information. So if I came forward saying I wanted to meet my birth parents or have more information, my birth parents would have also had to come forward, or one of them would have had to self-identify that they also wanted to meet. And
Right.
I totally understand why the courts did that, or why the laws changed to accommodate that. However, it makes it really difficult, and the process can take a long time to gather information, even if it's just information, even if you're not ready to physically meet in person or talk on the phone. That can be a very strenuous and painful process on both sides, for the child and for the birth parent, which my birth mother experienced. She at least has expressed to me that she was looking for me for a while. And I was in college at that point in time when she was really looking for me. And that would have been the early to mid 2000s, when some information is, shared openly on the internet. But if you don't have a name to look up and it's a closed adoption, it's pretty limited information to go through. But my reuniting story is a really beautiful one, pretty much as happy as you can get when it comes down to it. So I had just graduated from the University of Texas in Austin, and I was a student athlete there. So
What sport?
for swimming. So as you can imagine, a big school like Texas, very similar to the University of Cincinnati's and the Ohio States of the world, if media guides that are, with all of our information just out there for anybody to see, which was helpful in the kind of reuniting process. How my birth mother got my name is, as a starting point, is kind of this really interesting roundabout story. So Monica, my birth mother, was going through all the right chains of command of information and trying to basically track me down. And ultimately, what happened over years and years of roadblocks and twists and turns that, the system doesn't really allow for easy information access. Her husband, who's not my birth father, but the man that my birth mother married, he worked for the FBI at the time. And he said, just why don't you just let me use our resources? I'm not doing anything
Illegal.
just have a little bit better system to look up information. And so she finally gave in after years of basically struggling through the system. He found my name in about 15 minutes.
Wow.
And I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and there were very few people with my maiden name, Ferrito, in the phone book. So they literally just went down the list. There's only about 5 of us in Columbus, and they're all related. So the first person that they called was my uncle, my dad's brother, just to say, hey, this is us. Would you be open to a conversation?
Right.
My uncle immediately, calls my dad and says, here's the situation. What do you want to do? And I'm very, very blessed that my parents, folks who adopted me, were 100% open to facilitating that conversation. There's a lot of horror stories out there about parents withholding information or being scared to share. I am just so blessed that my parents were open. They had me in mind, just as my birth mother did when she was making that decision years ago. And I have always been what people have been thinking about, from all angles of my family. It was never about, oh, how is this reuniting going to make me feel? It was always, this is Elaine's life. And by that time, I was about 21, 22 years old. So just graduating from college, like on cloud 9, I had a job lined up, everything was good and happy. And then, kind of a cherry on top with my life at that moment in time was, oh, wow, this is great. Like, this is wonderful. I get to make the choice to learn more about my birth mother and her now very big family that she has. And so it wasn't immediate. There was a little bit of lag time between the phone call that my dad received, the conversation that my mom and I had regarding what do you want to do, and actually picking up the phone to call my birth mother. I'd say, gosh, that was probably about a month to a month and a half between, just kind of letting that information sink in, making the decision, getting the courage to pick up the phone and dial the numbers and call in hopes that it's all going to work out fine. You have to have a little leap of faith.
So with the phone call, you learned, that your birth mom is trying to find you. So you learned that. At that point in time, was there anything more in that message that told you more about her? Or is that you just knew that she's looking for you and you didn't get the rest of that until you talked to her?
I don't think there was a lot of details shared. There may have been just some details shared with my parents that I can't remember if they disclosed to me or not, but just that the overarching theme to that phone call was that we want this to be positive. We are a happy family ourselves, speaking about my birth mother and her husband and her children. This is Elaine's decision. So it was always focused on what I wanted to do with that information, and then how to proceed, and how quickly or how slowly was always up to me, which was very empowering at that moment in time. And I would hope that everybody's situation is like that, even though that's not realistic.
So your birth mom, so Monica, was she having some uneasy feelings of wondering how you felt about her? And you've already expressed that you didn't have any negative feelings at all growing up, about your birth mom. But was she wondering about that? And what was that like, having that conversation?
I don't know if she had any uneasy feelings. I would expect that she was nervous because of the unknown. I think that has to cultivate through closed adoptions. It's just, if you don't have any information for 20 years, people change over 20 years. People grow, and depending on all the influences in your life, I think all those play into how you feel about the situation. And I can't speak for her, but I mean, I've been under the impression that she's always had a really strong connection to her faith, which I respect, but I didn't. And even though I grew up Catholic, went through the whole, got confirmed, got to high school, and it just I got busy with sports, and I drifted away from going to church every Sunday and being involved in the Catholic faith. So by that point in my life, that was not an influencer. But for her, I believe it was. And so having that support system for her had to help her deal with all the unknowns. You don't know. You're literally meeting somebody new. Yes, you gave birth to that child 20, 30, however long it is, like 50 years ago, but you don't know them as an individual yet.
So you had that conversation. She was assuring you that she has a happy family life. She just wanted to reconnect. And then what, how long was it before you just talked on the phone for a long time before? What I mean by that is many times, before you met in person, or what was that journey?
Sure. So after that phone call happened, we actually wrote letters back and forth for about a year and a half. I was living in Texas at the time. She was living in Virginia. I had just started my first job out of college, so I didn't feel like I could take vacation days, and I wasn't ready to meet her face to face and meet her entire family. That felt a little overwhelming at the time, because she ultimately had, after me, she got married and had 5 more kids. Those ages ranged from, I think little Mark was probably 3 or 4 at the time, all the way up to high school. So there's 20 years between myself and her youngest child.
Right.
A lot of unknowns from my side too, but what was really helpful for our relationship and kind of setting the tone for what's ultimately the rest of my life now and her life and our relationship together was that when we wrote letters, it was all about sharing and feeling comfortable with what we wanted the relationship to look like. And it was learning about each other. And ultimately, she's raising 5 kids in that age range. She's pretty busy.
Right.
But I'm so grateful because she's very crafty. And so she put together all these like picture books for me and had me feel included into her family too, and never pushed to, meet up, or never pressured me to share any additional information I didn't want to share. But we wrote letters, which was fun. It's a little bit, traditional now. Sometimes we write emails now versus letters. I think it helped each of us be able to sit back, process what we want to say and how we want to say it, put it down on paper, and then send it out through the mail. And I was flying home to Ohio for Christmas. So I guess I was 23-ish at that time. And coincidentally, her family also lived in Ohio. Her parents and some of her siblings lived in Ohio, and they were driving through to visit family for the holidays. Ultimately, it was like the stars were aligning, and it's like, well, I'm going to be in Columbus. You're driving through Columbus. It's been a year and a half. We have all this new information now, all these pictures. I knew exactly what her kids looked like, and we felt like it was time. She and I met first, face to face. It was just, drove over to her hotel, picked her up. We went to breakfast, had a really nice conversation, and afterwards kind of drove around my neighborhood where I grew up. And then kind of like all happened within one morning. But I drive back to the hotel, and she asked me if I felt ready to meet everybody else. And at that point in time, I was definitely ready because of all the information shared. And so in the lobby of, I think it was like an embassy suites or something, I get to meet my 4 younger half brothers and my little half sister. And I remember little Mark, who was the youngest at the time, he was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And he just ran up to me like little kids do, ran up to me, gave me a big hug, and was like, "You're mommy's first baby." And it was so sweet and so endearing. It was a pretty neat moment with all of them together.
So you met up with your birth mother and you have a relationship with her family and all that. You talked a little bit about, that your birth father was Greek and there were older half siblings. Did you make any effort to meet your birth father? Or what can you tell me about that part of the story?
I felt more connected to my birth mother. Maybe that's just a woman to woman thing. I'm not sure, but
Right.
I had just felt like I wanted to find her first. And she gave me, after we talked for, a year and a half, and I had asked some just surface level questions about my birth father. She shared a little insight into her situation from her early 20s and what he was like as a person. She shared good things, she shared bad things, she shared really complicated things. I had a baseline of information about where he was most likely living, which was on the other side of the world in Greece, that he did have children, and he was in an arranged marriage, which, I think he stayed in that marriage for the remainder of his life. And that literally just geographic distance delayed my want or need to connect with him. Now, what's kind of fascinating with the resources that are available today, things like Ancestry.com and 23andMe. I participated in 23andMe about 5 years ago and maybe 4 years ago, and found the long list of distant relatives with traditionally Greek last names that were also within the 23andMe site.
Right.
So that's another kind of decision time. If you want to go down that path, you can. But I later found out that about 5 years ago, my birth father had passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I never got the opportunity to meet him. But I do still have 5 older half brothers. That's a very different angle with my adoption story, because they did not know about me growing up. And now their father is not around to defend himself or share his story.
Right.
So while that just looks different, with information being more and more available, it can change perspectives on not just the adoptive process, but what your history looks like, how you identify, what types of groups you feel like you belong to. And there is a sliver of my identity that does have this Greek influence, even though I didn't grow up with that. I don't know what the world is going to look like in 20 or 30 years.
Right. Who does? Right.
But I think the more transparent you can be with the child or with the family, I think that's helpful. And it's ultimately up to, the humans to make the decision of whether they want to share that information and when they can share that information with their children or not. But that really helped me. Those little nuggets of information really helped me during my childhood. And then it helped me as an adult have, even more empathy for people going through this process.
So if there's a woman in a crisis pregnancy who is thinking about adoption, right, but is a little bit afraid of it, and it could be for any number of reasons, all of which perhaps you couldn't speak to, but do you have anything to say to her like, okay, this is what I can tell you about adoption. that might help her see it in a more positive light than she currently sees?
It's a really loaded question because everyone's situation is really different. All of the influencers around this particular person plays a big role. I would say if I could recommend anything to that person is to don't be afraid to talk about it with somebody. Talk about all the options and make that decision that's best for you because you are literally going through a life-changing event and it's a life-changing decision that you're going to make whichever direction you decide to go. It's life-changing and it will stick with you for the rest of your life. Adoption is a beautiful gift that you can give to somebody. However, it's hard. You are literally creating a baby inside of you. It's growing. There's no way to hide it. And it's not just you're going to make the decision when that baby is conceived, or you're going to make that decision when you go to your 12-week appointment. It's the whole time. You will probably change your mind a lot, and it'll be this roller coaster ride. But if you choose to go down the adoption path, you are so strong, and surrounding yourself with supportive, positive people in that environment as you're going through it, during and after, that's the only thing I can suggest to people. Because if you are deciding to give the gift of adoption, you are participating in the most selfless act that you possibly can. I have carried and given birth to 2 little girls now, and it was on my mind the whole pregnancy, the whole labor, and it's still on my mind when I have, them at home and I'm watching them grow up. As an adopted child, and that is part of my identity, is being adopted, I'm just so grateful for that decision that my birth mother made, because life was not easy for her at that moment in time. My birth mother was alone. She did not have a supportive partner. Her family at the time was not incredibly supportive of this unplanned pregnancy, and the resources were not readily available like they are now. I do still think you have to look for those resources and find the right types of resources for you. But in the mid 80s, that was, the one thing that she really leaned into was her faith. So that's why I have a huge respect for people out there that do have a strong faith, especially if they use that in a positive way and use their community to lean on, because it is not something that you want to go through alone. I love that there are podcasts and information and articles out there sharing the beauty of adoption, because it is, even though it's a very painful process, an emotional process, mentally exhausting process, it is so beautiful, and it's a beautiful gift that you can provide to very loving families all across the world, maybe even in your own state, that you can give to people.
So anything else you feel like you wanted to add, that you wanted to say to anybody out there about adoption?
Thank you for listening, and thank you for being open to the idea. It's a lifelong decision, and I would not be around. I would not have this beautiful life that I have if my birth mother made a different decision back in 1985. And it seems like, well, it is decades ago, but
Right.
it's like I was able to find a loving husband, and I now have 2 beautiful girls of my own who are the first grandkids for my birth mother. I have a very beautiful story and a very happy one. the world needs a little more positive, happy stories than negative ones, because it's not all negative.
All right, Elaine, well, thanks for sharing your story with us today about your journey as someone who has been placed for adoption. I'm sure that people who hear this can hear the beauty and see more fully the beauty of adoption and how beautiful that can be. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for hosting me on your show, and thank you for everything that you're doing for your communities.
I want to thank all our viewers and listeners for tuning into this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website to check out the video version or the links talked about in this episode at www.catholicaoc.org/beingprolife. Thanks again for listening. I look forward to being with you next time.